Thank you, Chairman. We are live on YouTube now.
That's lovely. Thanks, Fiona. Right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Waverley Housing O&S Committee. For the benefit of any members of the public who have joined our live screen, my name is Councillor Richard Seaborn and I chair this committee. Can I ask members and officers to remain on mute when you're not speaking, please? And can you use the hand raise function within Zoom to indicate if you wish to speak, remembering to click the hand raise button again at the end of your question so that you are removed from the queue. Can I also ask that any questions are kept brief and to the point? The need to manage Zoom meetings tightly to avoid them dragging on means that we will be timing speeches this evening, and an alarm will be sounded when you've been speaking for 4 minutes. So we will be practicing a cut-off. If any members of the committee lose their connection temporarily, we will pause to allow them time to rejoin. If the webcast stream fails, however, because we are at a meeting in public, then we'll have to adjourn until we're able to reset the connection. Before we start, can I advise members that I've had a request to swap the order in which we consider agenda items 7 and 8 to allow the review of homelessness to follow on from the corporate performance review. And in my mind, that makes sense. So I'll make this adjustment to our running order when we get to that point. Right, that's the preamble. I'm ready to go. So if we can start with agenda item 1, which is the minutes on pages 7 to 12 of your papers. Our first item is to confirm that the minutes of the meeting of the Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 16th of March 2020, which are in your papers, represent a correct record of that meeting. Do any members wish to make any comments? I'm not seeing any. So if not, then I propose that we take the minutes as agreed. And I'll take agreement through the basis of not seeing any hands raised to raise any comments. So thanks, Kimberly. We'll take those as agreed. Before we move on, can I ask Yasmin to note 3 items from the minutes that need to be carried forward in our work programme under agenda item 10 later on. So in minute 59, we have an outstanding request for officers to present a short report on complaints as covered in the corporate quarterly performance review. This is partly covered by comments in the 4Q CPR, but I think we should discuss it later to agree if those comments are adequate or whether we want to further report. In minute 62, we will need to set up the working group on the allocations policy. In minute 63, we have an outstanding request for an officer report on update on mental health and housing provision. So again, can we discuss that later? Right, so that, as far as I can see, concludes the minutes. Moving on, Kimberly, do we have any apologies or substitutes this evening?
We have no apologies, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Have there been any declarations of interest submitted under item 3?
No declarations, Chairman.
Good, good. On item 4, have we received any questions from members of the public?
No questions, Chairman.
And item 5, have any members submitted questions in advance?
No questions, Chairman.
Okay, well, that gets us onto the substance of the meeting nice and quickly. Good, good. So agenda item 6 is a review of the corporate performance report for the final quarter of the last council year. Can I remember councillors that we are focusing only on sections 5 and 6 of the report covered on pages 46 to 57, so those that relate to housing. And can I also ask that members hold back any questions relating to homelessness until agenda item 8, or in the order we're doing it this evening, it'll be 7, but please try and hold off questions on that particular item. I think there will probably be quite a few questions. I have some, but I think it's going to be probably more appropriate if we wait for Michael Rivers to give us an update and then ask him the questions about the worrying situation that we find ourselves in at that point.
Chairman, Councillor Ellis has her hand up.
I beg your pardon. Okay, thank you. Please go ahead, Patricia.
Thank you, Chairman. I apologise. I should have let Kimberly know before. I just wanted to declare an interest that I am currently acting as Waverley Observer and Chairman of one of the voluntary charities supported by service level agreements. There are references in the agenda to SLAs, health checks and grants that I am personally involved in, but I don't really think that there's anything that would cause me to have to leave the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll bear that in mind, and just put your hand up again should you think it appropriate to duck out. Well, I'll just go on to mute. Thank you. Right, so under the performance review, can we start by asking Andrew Smith, Head of Housing Development, to introduce section 5 on housing delivery?
Thank you very much, Chairman. And just to pick up Councillor Ellis's point, I will not be referring to anything under the communities section, so she'll not have to declare any interest. Really, I think one of the bulk items that I would have commented on is under homelessness, bearing in mind, Chairman and committee, that this just runs to the 31st of March. And at that point, we were seeing 5 households in temporary accommodation, which is a 5-fold increase, I think, on the previous quarter. But Michael Rivers will come in on that, and I'll be supporting him when he presents what's happened since then in terms of homelessness. Just to highlight really something under housing delivery. Since the report was completed, there is mention in there about Site A, Oxford Ridge, and the possibility of delays on completion on Site A. It's been amazing that the contractor really, under the whole of the pandemic situation, phase 1 of the 37 homes, Site A, Oxford Ridge, were only delivered 3 weeks late. So that is 10 homes, rather 11 homes, and with 10 of those now occupied by very happy new households. 4 more should be delivered to us this week, and then more in August, and the rest in October. So hopefully in October, we'll be able to have a celebration on Site A, Oxford Ridge. Looking down the report, 142 affordable homes delivered during the year by ourselves and housing associations. So that was a good year. And then Alice Lee, our Housing Strategy Enabling Manager, will be bringing a report to the committee in September, the Housing Strategy Annual Progress Review, where there'll be more detail on that and where committee might be able to ask more questions. And certainly as we look forward and see also how the pandemic has affected housing association partners. And that, Chairman, is all really I wanted to highlight. As I say, I think the major item on this will be the homelessness item, which we'll come to shortly. And I'm very happy to take any questions from members of the committee at this point. Thank you, Chairman.
No, thanks, Andrew. So I have Councillor Baker's hand up. Would you like to?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Looking at Andrew Smith's report, Housing Delivery and Communities, I see a reference to the draft affordable housing supplementary planning document, which I think is now to be revised. There is now an issue with the matter of viability, where developers are claiming that sites are no longer viable for inclusion of an element of affordable housing. And I think, first of all, it's helpful that we're all aware of this. And if you turn to page 47 of the agenda, if you have it there, that's where it indicates that the planning document needs to be revised. I'm just wondering if it would be possible to include in that revision some means of managing this problem of viability. Perhaps that could be a question for Mr. Smith to take in conjunction with Zach Elwood.
You're on mute, Andrew.
I never get this right, Chairman. Yes, thank you, Councillor Baker. That is a very live issue. There's been quite a bit of email correspondence between councillors and Zach Elwood that I've been watching. Zach Elwood and I hope to take something to exec briefing before too long to just open up this discussion about viability. And what has been good is that following 2 seminars, one for officers and then one for members from the Town and Country Planning Association that we held, I think earlier in the year, March the 4th, around that time, members are now much more fired up on the whole issue of viability and ensuring that developers do provide what they should do under planning obligations. As regards the planning of the affordable housing supplementary planning document, we are in discussion at the moment with planning colleagues about when that should be launched. It's been through this committee, I think, in the past, but now there's not only the climate change emergency material that we may need to incorporate, but also perhaps to make it more robust on the issue of viability, and that may well be timed with the adoption of Local Plan Part 2 or other development management policies. So thanks to Councillor Baker for that. It's a live issue. It's a helpful thing for us all to discuss and to firm up on this whole issue of viability to ensure that we do see delivered the affordable homes that the borough needs. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Okay. Councillor James is next on the question list.
Thank you, Chairman. At the bottom of page 47, we're employing somebody new who's going to look at the empty homes. Do we have any idea of how many empty? I only know of one empty home in Chiddingfold, and it happens to be a council house, and it's been empty for ages, and it's in perfect condition. And I don't know why we haven't got homeless people in it at the moment, but I don't see where I live and where I drive around any empty homes. So do we have a vague idea of how many empty homes that there are in the district? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor James. Yes, at the last count, there were around 500. Bringing empty homes back into use is extremely time consuming. One of the reasons that we want to give more resources to that, and that is one of the reasons that our new officer who will look at grants, disabled facilities grants, and also looking at empty homes, how we can bring them back into use. A lot of them are held up in probate. A lot of them are, it's just very difficult to get the owners engaged. So we are putting an officer resource into that. But to answer the question on numbers, the last count around 500 on the council house in Chiddingfold. I can certainly take that back from the committee and ask where we are with that particular one. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, if that's Councillor James, or at least is an acceptable answer. Thank you. Good. Okay, Councillor Cole, please.
Thank you, Chairman. In the report, it refers to 65 new affordable homes being delivered in this quarter, this quarter 4. Can you give us a heads up as to what the sort of the general delay is on delivery of affordable houses through the shutdown? 1 month, 2 months, 3 months? Do you have a feeling on that?
Delay on affordable homes. What you mean that might be caused through the pandemic, Councillor, or just generally?
Yeah. No, caused by site shutdowns during the pandemic.
Not really. I think that's something we're trying to now get from our housing association partners as they begin to start sort of building, or rather developers begin building again. And I can certainly bring something on that back to the next committee or circulate something to the committee in the meantime, but I don't really have an indication at the moment. It's a bit too early.
Thank you. Thanks, Chairman.
Okay. Right, I think that concludes the hands up. I have a couple of points I'd like to officers to clarify. Can officers advise members in relation to page 47, paragraph 7? Can members be advised what level of grant is needed to move an affordable rental property into the social rental bracket, and explain what policy is supporting the decision when we decide to do that? So that's one question. And then on page 48, paragraph 1, can officers let us know the latest best guess as to when the key housing conditions survey will be conducted, given that it's a key contributor to the carbon reduction action plan?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, in terms of grant to convert an affordable rent to a social rent, depends obviously on the size of the property. If an affordable rent is something around 80% of the market rent, including service charges, and social rent is about 50%, then obviously you're looking at that level of uplift, depending on the property, the size of the property, and so on. In terms of, can you just remind me of the second question, Chairman, and then I can answer that.
Well, just following on from that first one, I was also asking what policy are you using to guide the decision when we switch from affordable to social rent?
I mean, we are wanting to make those rents as near to social as possible. If we're thinking about our own new build, then obviously we have to do our appraisals. We have to make that stack up. We have to ensure equally that those on the register and those for whom we are building can actually afford the rent. And we did have a situation in Shamley Green 18 months ago, where the properties came in at an affordable rent, 80%. Actually, those on the register really who were eligible for them couldn't afford that rent. And so we redid the calculations, and I think those rents in the end came at about 65% of market rent rather than 80%, and therefore were affordable. This is an ongoing discussion. What we are hoping to do is set what we would call a Waverley rent. That means that those in the borough who need homes and are on the low to moderate incomes can afford them. 80% of market rent in Waverley is still a lot of money. You have to balance that with the local housing allowance and whether that will actually cover the rent. So it's quite a complex discussion that we're having at the moment. We want to take this through the committee stages eventually, when we can actually come up with a rent that we feel is affordable to all in the borough, which will be between about 50% of market rent and about 80% of market rent. So there's no sort of policy as such at the moment, Chairman, but we are hoping to formulate one based on those discussions we had with the Town and Country Planning Association on viability. Certainly, we are working with housing association partners to push them to deliver social rent. And certainly under the previous Prime Minister, there was a realisation that social rent was important. We were seeing that moving forward in terms of government policy. Not quite seeing such clarity on that at the moment, but the lobbying is strong. And particularly coming out of the pandemic with key workers, care workers, workers in the National Health Service, I think it's been realised that actually nationally there is a real need to deliver social rent. So hopefully we'll be able to formulate something that works well for us in the coming months.
Good. Okay, so that was essentially the question. Are you going to bring us something forward that sets out clearly so we understand how it's being done rather than everything being case by case, which it is to be at the moment? Lovely. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And the other item was the housing conditions survey. That's obviously going to be a key driver to support the climate change action plan. So knowing when we might expect this to surface would be helpful.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so we've had a costing on that from BRE, which is around £40,000. So it's an expensive item. We now need to take a paper to Management Board to gain the approval to commission that survey that we hope will commence probably in the new year, because the BRE themselves are behind on their work because of various things they were before even the pandemic. But we are hoping to start that, commission that to commence in the new year. And again, we do have to get approval to spend that amount of money because it is an expensive job.
Right, thank you very much. So I think when we get to the recommendations at the end of this overall section, we might want to just have a quick discussion as to whether this committee wants to support officers in recommending that is a worthwhile piece of work or not. Okay. Right, so that's Andrew. So if we can move on to the operations team, I believe Annalisa.
Sorry, Chairman, Councillor Ellis.
I beg your pardon. Sorry, Councillor Ellis. Please go ahead.
Sorry, I think I'm back with you now, and I apologise. Page 48, item paragraph number 3, regarding rough sleeping. I was wondering if there are a number of people who are rough sleeping that we've managed to help to house in hotels. Do we know what that is? And what will happen to these people when the support finishes? And also, has everybody who has been rough sleeping actually accepted our support and help, or do we still have a number of people rough sleeping? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Councillor Ellis. That will be picked up under Michael Rivers' item that will be coming up shortly.
Right, okay. So having missed one hand, I don't see any more up at the moment. So if we could possibly move on to housing operations, and I believe Annalisa Howson's going to introduce that for us. Thanks, Annalisa.
Thank you, Chair. So just to say that this is the Q4 report, and because the way the committee cycle works, it is 3 months out of date, but I don't want us to ignore all the great work that was done during Q4, and also it gives you the information for the whole financial year as well. So this is an opportunity for us to share some of the things we did before the COVID-19 pandemic. During the last quarter of the last financial year, we launched the housing team with 8 housing officers who are based on smaller patches. We attended the tenants panel open meeting, which went very well. We talked to tenants about the new housing team and also the reason for the rent increase. All our tenants got their rent increase notification letters during February and March. And also we mobilised the new interim contractor in March as well. Since then, we all know what happened since our last meeting in March. And so we've pulled out the STAR team as the housing customer service team, who had done amazingly well in working with 3 different contractors in 1 financial year. And then also, as the pandemic hit and we needed to mobilise different services, they swiftly set up the Waverley Committees support helpline and really diagnosed and triaged cases and made sure that people got their medicines, their food, their befriending services. They acted as an interim between the people and the charitable services who were delivering all the key services. The performance information during the recovery, change and transformation report, I'll give you more up-to-date information, but it's just of note that you were well aware of the changes in the contractor was going to have an impact on the relet times and the responsive repairs times. But it's good to see that up until the end of March, we continued with good gas safety PIs and also the rent income PIs. Looking at the year as a whole, we completed all our service plan actions. On the pie chart, you can't see the detail, but some of the actions we were completed were making sure we've got a robust process to help tenants who are on universal credit. We reviewed the future of the family support team and enabled their move into Guildford. We've been an active member of the Chartered Institute of Housing, and some of you attended a joint event we put on to celebrate 100 years of council housing. And we also mobilised the new interim contractor. And I'm happy to take any questions about Q4 performance.
Excellent, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councillor Cole, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, perhaps jumping a bit ahead into quarter 1, but having got a new interim supplier for maintenance, responsible repairs, have they been able to handle the change volume of work? The last contractor allegedly said that was a problem with his being able to carry on with the contract. So is a new one able to work more flexibly?
The new contractor had about a week or 2 weeks in post before we had the lockdown. So we had plans in place and have prioritised works for the backlog of works. Hugh, do you want to add anything? I think really the situation we're in now, obviously through all our original plans askew, and during the lockdown you'll have read that we were only focusing on emergency repairs. So we're now gradually working back up to start on the backlog of responsive repairs, and we're working really closely with the contractor to get that work completed.
I think my point was more is this contractor, I hope they're not complaining about the fact there's not any work. I mean, the last one complained bitterly that the amount of work they were being given was a lot less than they were promised. I'm hoping that you'll say that the current contractor, the interim contractor, is able to deal with the situation and is not causing a fuss about it. If you just confirm that, then I'm satisfied.
Yeah, yes, this is Hugh here. Just to confirm that, because they furloughed their staff, so they managed their costs through that way. So, and a number of repairs orders we did decrease. Tenants did stop calling to make non-urgent repairs, and later on we'll talk about the recovery and tenants starting to report repairs. But basically, we're on track at the moment financially with the contractor.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. I've got Heather's hand up. That came up in response to the question, so I presume you want to add something. Do you, Heather?
Yeah, just basically in terms of the backlog, we had that split that into 2 lots as well, councillor. So that was being managed by a separate contract. All those jobs, whilst they are not completed, they are all appointed now, and that's being managed going forward to anything we've got sort of in the pipeline from the current works that are coming in. Those are being managed too. There are no complaints from the contractor in terms of doing the works or being able or not having enough revenue, but we're set up in a different way from the previous contractor as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Right, I think Councillor Goodrich was next on the list to ask a question, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at the complaints in Q4. I see there's been a slight improvement on Q3 on both level 1 and level 2, marginally, despite the fact that there's a few weeks of lockdown that's covered. Presumably, has COVID had any impact on the level of complaints? Because clearly, if we don't get something within 10 working days, because the last week of the quarter we couldn't get much done. I mean, would the percentage be better, but for COVID? Has COVID affected the timescale of dealing with complaints?
I haven't actually seen the data for Q1 yet, but just kind of seeing what's been coming through. During the lockdown period, we had a very low number of complaints. So therefore, we should see some better performance in Q1. I would say over the last couple of weeks, as lockdown has eased and people have been leaving their homes, there has been a slight increase in the number of complaints. But essentially for nearly 3 months, we would have got a very small handful.
I was really asking the question in Q4.
Oh, sorry.
Where our figures might have been better, because I mean COVID did cover the end of Q4.
Just 2 weeks of Q4, so I don't think it would have made much of a difference. Because we've had such poor performance in this year so far, all staff were reminded of the targets and were pushed to try and meet them, which is why we've got better performance. And if you think, it's only a very small number really within all the contacts we have with people. One can have quite a big impact on the statistic.
Okay, does that adequately address the question? Thank you very much. Good. Okay, I have Councillor Baker next.
Thank you, Chair. I have actually had fairly serious complaint from someone who lives in my ward, which is Milford. This isn't the place to go into detail, but it does raise in my mind the question of whether we've actually suspended the renewal of kitchens and bathrooms, because the complaint is about general condition of a bathroom, but there is supposed to be a replacement of that bathroom at some point, and so the general condition isn't being remedied. Can you just give me a general statement of the situation as regards bathroom replacements, please?
Okay, during lockdown, all kitchen and bathroom programmes were halted because we couldn't enter people's homes. Since the lockdown's been eased, we are reviewing our programme and contacting tenants to see whether they are able to have a kitchen or a bathroom replacement. The issue is that we've got to have quite a few people go into the home, which some sheltered, shielded residents or older residents would not be happy with. And also we're in the home for a good week, maybe a week and a half, to make sure all the work's complete. But we are working with our contractor and contacting tenants, starting with the younger tenants, to see whether we are able to kickstart that programme again.
Thank you. This has actually been registered with the council as I think a level 1 complaint anyway. So it's not for me to take it forward here, but I just wanted an understanding of the situation. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of questions. One of them I'm not sure of its relevance at this point.
Just check that through. So I haven't ordered anything. All right.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, carry on, please.
A couple of things. The first is to say how very impressed I was with the way that Waverley took to ringing people that were vulnerable to make sure they were all right and that they had everything they needed. I think that's to be congratulated.
Yeah, yeah.
And one of the questions I have is, when you were phoning people, did you have many vulnerable people worrying about how they would pay their rent? I know of a couple of people that instantly lost all their work because they couldn't go into people's homes, and they were cleaners and they did ironing and all sorts of things. And, you know, they have spoken to me about their worries about paying their rent. And my second question was, following on from Councillor Baker, are the general repairs now slowly coming back into line? Because again, I know of one household that really does need some repairs to their bathroom. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks for those questions. With regards to the rent, the older people we spoke to were more worried about how they were going to physically pay the rent rather than having the money to do it, because they would go to the post office or the local shop to pay. So we gave them a lot of information and support about bank transfers and paying over the phone and things like that to help people to pay. Our rents team have been working very closely with people who have been falling into arrears and have had about 300 tenants contact them direct to let them know that their income has changed due to the COVID crisis. And again, they're supporting and working with them. And I think you'll see in the next paper, you know, an increase in universal credit claims. So we're doing a lot of support with residents to make sure they're maximising their income, they're prioritising rent as a payment, and really supporting people through this. And then your question about the general repairs, yes, we wrote to all tenants just at the a couple of weeks ago to let them know that the responsive repair service is back up and running. We're doing more than just emergency works now. As Heather said, our contractors made contact with everybody who had a repair booked before lockdown and made appointments with them, and we're slowly picking up and dealing with new cases as they come through.
Great, thanks, Annalisa. Does that adequately deal with your questions, Councillor Keane?
That's fine. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Good. Okay, thank you. Right. So I've got a couple of questions I want to bring up, but first let me start by congratulating the customer service team for being recognised as a star team. Hope when we get to summarising what we want to recommend, the committee will support me in asking that to be minuted as congratulations on behalf of the committee. Well done. The questions I've got relate to the finance section at the foot of page 57. Firstly, I'm just interested to know why zero variance qualifies to be an adverse outcome. Presumably the system requires you to put as adverse or favourable and toss a coin, I don't know, but it'd be interesting to know why that is. Of more substance is at the foot, there's a reference to a £756,000 underspend of the responsive repairs budget. I don't know, could we just have a bit more detail about that? Because that's a very significant number and it's not really explained in the numbers above. So perhaps you could just set out for us where that £750,000 came from. Okay, thank you.
So, Chair, well, what that was due to, a couple of things, is we had a substantial budget because we knew of the new contract, so we weren't sure where to set that budget. And as you're aware, the volume of work was less than expected. Just generally, our repairs did reduce, and that was the part of the problem we had with NPS because of the volumes did decrease. And then really at the end of the month, March, the number of repairs actually reduced even further for two reasons: because we had the new contractor in and the handover process, so the repairs, the volumes dropped even greater. And then the last couple of weeks, we had the COVID crisis. So there's a number of different issues, i.e. we set the budget relatively high because we thought there was some risk through the year. The volume of repairs ordered by tenants directly did decrease less than we anticipated. And then we had NPS actually stop performing. Then we had the mobilisation, which did slow down the number of repairs to be actually completed. And then, as I say, we had the last thing was the COVID at the end, right at the end of the year. So it wasn't a lack of, this doesn't show a lack of, what's the word, of people expecting those repairs to be done. This was actually repairs that weren't actually ordered. I don't know if that's clear, Chair.
Yes, no, that's perfectly clear. I guess when I see a big number like £750,000, it's maybe helpful to have just a bit more explanation. So your explanation is perfectly clear. I guess message for the future: if we have big numbers, maybe just slightly more padding in the explanation would be helpful. Thanks. Right, I don't see any hands up, so we're invited to consider the performance report, which we've done, and make any observations or recommendations as appropriate. So I guess an observation is that it's been a good year for delivery of housing, so well done. An observation is that the SBD for affordable housing is being kicked around in relation to the issues of climate change emergency, but also members introduced the concern about viability. So we probably want to note that when that document is revisited, viability, we'd expect to see viability built into the deliberations. Then I raised the question of the housing condition survey. I feel quite strongly that it's a very good thing to have on the table, because housing is the biggest cause of carbon emissions in Waverley, and I believe we need to understand exactly where we are, so that the appropriate steps can be taken to deal with that. But do any other members wish to comment on that? In which case, I'm not seeing any hands going up. I'd like the committee to say that it would endorse any request from the service teams for funding to support that initiative. Councillor Goodrich has just put his hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, I think that's where we could usefully spend some of the climate change emergency budget, so that we've got a better handle on what it's going to cost us to bring council houses up to better emissions than they are now, and to learn the lesson generally, because I suspect private housing has probably got some of the same as well, but we can at least lead from so I think if we're going to spend some money on climate change emergency, this is the right place to spend it.
Right, thank you. Okay, Councillor James, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Chairman. I would, at the moment, be slightly reluctant, having just had the financial briefing we've just had, when we're trying to save some money, every pound, as somebody said, every £200 counts in doing the things that we need to do at the moment. And of course, as you know, living in a 500-year-old house that has nothing in it at all, and it will still be here probably long after council houses have fallen down, to me, it's not an essential or a necessity at the moment. So I would just, I won't be supportive, but I won't say no either. So I'll just abstain, I think, because I think there are greater priorities that council houses need at the moment. It's getting a roof over people's heads is more important than the green agenda, in my view. That's all. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, Andrew Smith is clearly chomping at the bit to come in with a comment, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just point out this is not just for council housing, it's for all housing across the borough. It is not something that will be funded from the HRA. It's something that, if it's funded, will come from the money set aside for the climate change emergency. So it is for all properties in the borough, not just council housing.
And if I might chip in with a couple of just observations as to the way the carbon reduction action process is going. Firstly, in the budget presentation, we had £300,000 was kept in the reserve for this item. So, well, for the whole exercise, but actually because of COVID, we're falling behind in what we can do. So I think this is an absolutely key piece of work to enable the climate change action group to understand what we're actually looking for and come up with sensible recommendations. And then on last Thursday, I sat in on the climate change action group's deliberations, and I think it's probably fair to say they're not as far forward as we would like. And this is a piece of work that is going to actually hold them back if they don't, if it's not made available. Housing's emitting a huge amount of Waverley Council's contribution to the carbon emission situation. And I think, if we don't understand what the problem is, it's very hard for the housing teams to come up with solutions. I've got Councillor Goodrich wanting to come back. Please do.
Yeah, the point I was making, Chairman, is that if we're going to spend money on climate change emergency, if this should be top of the list or very high up on the list, so that, and I'm conscious that the budget doesn't seem to have been reduced so far as the climate change agenda is concerned, but that's an overall budget problem. But if there's money left for climate change emergency, this does seem to me to be an important bit of work that needs to be done for us to have any idea of how much it's going to cost us to comply with the deadline that the council has set for reducing our carbon emissions.
Thank you. And I have Councillor Baker.
Thank you. I think as this is part and parcel of a whole initiative, that we can't afford to leave it out, as actually, Chairman, you have said. But I feel that while housing is a crisis, the climate is an even greater crisis, and we can't afford not to do this, as you said also, especially as it is an obstacle to completing a whole initiative. And I think we have to do it. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Councillor Marriott.
Thank you, Chair. We should also remember that the initiatives we take to, let's say, improve the thermal insulation in houses is a benefit to the residents. You know, these days, a lot of families are on low incomes, and particularly with the effect of COVID. So any saving we make will help them a lot, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Good. So, I was suggesting that the committee endorse any recommendation by officers to ask for the necessary funding, and I think I'm hearing a majority are prepared to endorse that. So, if Kimberly, you could record that the committee wishes to do that, and then I think we ought to be congratulating the officers on the customer service team being recognised as a star team, and also it was mentioned earlier that the response at the start of the pandemic was excellent by officers, and I think it's appropriate as a committee that we recognise that and commend that excellent performance to the executive. Okay, so that's my summary. I think we probably covered that item and are ready to move on. But as I mentioned earlier, we're going to juxtapose items 7 and 8 because homelessness is big and flows on from it's a big issue, and it flows on from what we've just heard in terms of summary reports. So can I ask Michael Rivers to take over and give us his update, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just to sort of cast people's minds back, you may recall at the beginning of the lockdown period, the government were very concerned in terms of rough sleepers. Just to give some context, under our statutory duties, councils have a duty to try and prevent or relieve homelessness, but that duty doesn't necessarily extend to providing accommodation, emergency accommodation, to people who are not deemed to be in priority need. So at the beginning of the lockdown, the government actually required councils across the UK to actually provide emergency accommodation for rough sleepers, whether they're in priority need or not. And obviously this was a massive task. And just to sort of give you a few headlines of where we were, at any given point since March, we sometimes had as many as 15 rough sleepers or single people under threat of rough sleeping in emergency accommodation. It was quite complicated, particularly at the beginning, because once lockdown was announced, and then this impacted other councils particularly, existing homeless households placed in hotel accommodation were actually required to leave that accommodation at the beginning of lockdown because the hotels were closing down. Thankfully, a number of the hotels did reopen, and they were open to actually house rough sleepers or people under threat of rough sleeping. So it was very challenging because the location of the hotels were not necessarily convenient. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we were placing people in a hotel in Southampton, in London, in Farnborough, and in Woking. And in addition to that, we also had to, because the hotels weren't providing any food and anything, we had to also arrange for like food parcels and liaise with voluntary organisations to deliver food to households, which you can imagine is quite a challenge if we place people in a hotel in Southampton. So the team did amazingly well responding to this. As I say, over this period, we've housed over 30 households in emergency accommodation. And probably the most at any one time was 15 households. And currently we've got 5 households in emergency accommodation on this basis. The very good news is that of those 30, over 20 have actually been able to help into longer term accommodation. This has been either refuge accommodation if people were victims of domestic abuse, housing association accommodation, supported accommodation, and some of our short life council accommodation that we've repurposed for some of these clients. So it's been a sterling effort by the team, not only to sort of respond to the emergency, but also to come up with some longer term solutions. And just practical things like if people are moving into an empty property as a long term solution, it's providing things like crockery and kettles and toasters. So officers were liaising with local charities to get some of the charities to donate these items. So it was an amazing effort, and you know, it's really gratifying to see some of the positive outcomes. Obviously can't go into details in this public arena, but certainly there was a particular long-term victim of domestic abuse who we've been encouraging to try and access refuge accommodation for a number of years, who through this period has been successfully placed in a refuge. So that was very gratifying. And also a particular long-term rough sleeper who struggled to engage with us for a number of years, has also had drug alcohol problems, has also engaged with drug alcohol services, and has now been given the opportunity of longer term accommodation. So it's really gratifying. Going into Councillor Ellis's point, not everyone actually wanted the accommodation we were offering. So there were a small number who refused the offer. There are also people who we placed, but unfortunately their behaviour meant that the placements had to end and the hotel accommodation refused to accommodate them any longer. These were only a handful of cases, but it's just worth noting that. So it's quite a sterling effort by the team. Again, even more challenging because of working from home and not overhearing all those conversations, but it's been excellent work. So we're really proud of that. Just to sort of note on the finances, you're probably aware that over the years we've had an amazing record at keeping numbers in temporary accommodation at such a low level. So having to place over 30 households into emergency accommodation has a financial impact. So the cost to Waverley this year for providing emergency B&B was £35,744 compared with the same period of last year. It was a cost of £23. So it's sort of quite an impact. On a positive note, we did receive a grant from Surrey County Council to help towards costs of £13,000. So that was very gratefully received. But you know, it is quite a financial challenge to us. And I think it's worth members being aware that actually the bigger challenges are almost ahead, because the government, as part of the lockdown measures, required that private landlords couldn't evict people, as well as social landlords couldn't evict people through the courts until at least the end of August. We're hoping that will be extended, but as people have already noted, the impact of on people's employment is likely to mean that people have built up rent arrears, and if any landlord has the opportunity to actually bring those tenancies to an end, they may well choose to do that. And so we are likely to face an increased wave of homelessness when those restrictions in landlords taking court action are brought into play. And that's also going to impact in terms of our emergency accommodation costs. Obviously, we'll do our level best. We've got a great track record of preventing homelessness, and we're still trying to do that. But it's just important for members to be aware that because of COVID-19, the impact on employment and people to be able to sustain their tenancies is likely to have a big impact on the work on the team and on us being able to actually successfully prevent homelessness. So in addition to dealing with this challenge and dealing with homelessness, we've also had the challenge of, which is coming now that the contractors are back being able to repair properties. We've got over 70 void properties that we need to re-let. And so that's a massive task for the Home Choice team to, and for the other teams that help with that, the tenancy and estates team, the repairs team, and everyone else to actually let those properties as soon as possible, because obviously until they are let, that's lost income to the housing revenue account. So there's a big task ahead. So not only are we managing the homelessness, but we've also got this massive task now of trying to let these properties as quickly as possible. Again, adapting viewings because of the COVID restrictions. So we're having to adapt processes for clients on that. So it's been very challenging in terms of staff resources. We've also had some sickness thrown in. We already had quite a streamlined team. So to cope with this increased work has been very challenging. But as I say, the staff have been amazing with that. We are trying to get a bit of more admin support to help with the staffing challenges, because it is unprecedented sort of dealing with these crisis situations. And as I say, going forward, there's not going to be a quick fix to this. So I think it is going to be challenging. And yeah, I mean, probably it's best if I wrap it up there, then sort of take any questions that people may have, if that's okay, Chairman.
Yes, thanks very much. Thanks. It's goodness me. Yeah, it's as ever, it's impressive what you've done. And but it sounds like we're only just on the starting blocks for potentially even bigger problems. So I have Michael Goodridge's hand up. Michael, would you like to go ahead, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to congratulate, I'm sure we'd all like to congratulate Michael Rivers and his team for the sterling work they've done over the last 3 months. And the problems that are ahead, as you mentioned, Chairman. I mean, clearly they need to have the wherewithal to do the work, and I'm sure the management team will bear in mind that this housing team just do need the resources if they're to carry on the excellent work they're doing and the problems they're solving. I was glad that my Rotary Club, the Rotary Club of Godalming, were actually buying lots of toasters and kettles and one thing and another as a result of being asked to supply some. So,
yeah, thank you.
That was something which we were glad to contribute to, but clearly if there are any other similar requests, we'll try and do what we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to ask a question? Councillor Cole, please go ahead.
Thank you. Ask the funds which the council has and has awarded to date the budget for homelessness, does that come from the housing revenue account, or is that from general funds?
No, yeah, homelessness is from the general fund. So there, yes, it's an important distinction. So anything to do with homelessness must come from the general fund rather than the housing revenue account.
Yeah, okay, because that's the side which is under most pressure as a result of the loss of income. So yeah, okay, thanks for that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Further questions? Okay, let's test it. Councillor Baker, please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I really, when I'm on these Zoom meetings, I expect I'm the same as everybody else. I try and concentrate very hard on the questions that we might ask and keep very closely to the matter in the reports. But it is quite easy to forget to pay compliments to the staff. And I'm very pleased to hear people saying how magnificently people in the housing department have done at Waverley, because I have felt this since we heard about their activities over lockdown. So I would just like everybody who works in the housing department to know that we councillors are all aware of the fantastic efforts they've been making and the difference they have made to the community. And I just wanted to say that because I'm sure everybody else will feel the same. So I'm just underlining what you've said as something that is very much uppermost in my mind at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments.
Thank you.
Right, not seeing any more questions. The things I wanted to say, Councillor Goodridge has effectively already said. This is going to be an ongoing issue for quite a while, and without, or recognising that we should try and avoid causing distractions for the homelessness team, I still think it's probably something that we ought to be asking for an update at the next meeting and probably the subsequent one, to keep our eye on this, because it is going to be a very serious issue. We've got so used to Michael standing in front of us and telling us that a bad situation is 5 households in temporary housing, and yet we're now exposed to a much greater risk. So if the officers are comfortable with that, I'd very much like to have a standing item for the next couple of meetings at least, to just have a quick update as to where we are. So in terms of, I beg your pardon, I've got Andrew Smith would like to just interject there. Please go ahead, Andrew.
Yes, thanks very much, Chairman. Really just to underline what Mike has said, that the way the team have functioned, immediately scattered to the 4 winds, having to work from home and then dealing with immensely complicated cases. I happened to be in the office last week and spoke to one of our housing options officers, and he was explaining to me one particular case, which is incredibly complicated, would have to involve other agencies because there's alcohol abuse, there's behaviour. Even one of the very sort of toughest of the bed and breakfasts that we would use wouldn't take this particular individual. And then there's a solicitor coming in challenging that we haven't fulfilled our duties under the Homelessness Prevention Act or the Homelessness Reduction Act. So really just to underline the incredible complexity of the work that fairly junior officers are doing day to day. They are housing officers, they're not drug counsellors, they're not specialised in these things, they're having to link in with other professionals. So it really is a testimony to the multi-competence of fairly junior officers to make this work. And I think what Michael has said is absolutely true. I've been keeping a very close eye on them individually and as a team, and they really have done fantastic work. Who knows what's around the corner, but we are well placed to deal with it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Andrew. Right, so I guess I'm hearing 2 things we probably want to comment on to the executive. Firstly, is a heartfelt commendation to the team effort, both in responding in the short term and for coming up with long-term solutions to the problems that are being thrown their way. So start with a commendation, and then Councillor Goodrich came up with the point that was on my mind. It seems to me very important that the homelessness team is provided with the resources it needs to do the work it has in hand. Whereas people are coming out of lockdown now, it doesn't feel like this is a part of the situation that's going to go away anytime soon. And therefore it's important to probably recommend that the team should be able to ask for both financial and staff resource to enable the council to stay on top of that, stay on top of the situation as best it can. That's what I would like to see. Do any members wish to add anything or comment on those recommendations? I'm not seeing anything. So, okay. Thank you very much, Michael, for giving us your valuable time, and well done for everything that's been done, and good luck going forward.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for your support. Thank you.
Right. The next item is probably something to enter into with a bit more of a smile on our face than we managed for the last one, and that's around the procurement scrutiny task and finish group report. I'm pleased that it's coming in front of the committee today and that it represents the first piece of virtual task and finish work carried out by this council. The work was very ably chaired by Peter Marriott, and I'm going to ask him to introduce and lead the conversation here. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. As we've just heard, the item covers the report of the Task and Finish Group, and that was set up to make recommendations for consideration by the Executive, and relates to the procurement and the specification of the housing maintenance contract. The report is included in the meeting documents, pages 71 to 84. I think the task group discussions were very comprehensive, with detailed input from the officers and their specialist consultants, Faithorn, Farrell and Timms, otherwise FFT. And they provided a lot of excellent expertise on contract procurement and specification with relevance to the social housing maintenance issue. The group met twice, and our discussions included a review of the history of the previous contract, and consider how aspects of this might need to be considered in the new procurement. As we're all aware, the last contract was awarded to Mears and started in April 2019. Unfortunately, they exercised their right to terminate the contract, and that occurred in March 2020. Citing costs were more than anticipated, and I think the workload was lower, the volumes of work were lower than they anticipated as well. So since then, excuse me, we've had an interim arrangement set up with an alternative supplier. The plan is now to appoint a new contractor, and he will hopefully take over the work by November 2021. Now, in our discussions, we looked at different delivery and contractual models, and including the potential for example, shared services with other authorities, using more than one contractor in our borough, say with specific responsibility areas, and also what we call handy person service to provide local quick responses. Now, it was felt that whilst there was some attraction with these approaches, there were management issues to consider and possible conflicts in defining and managing responsibilities. So the way we felt this would go was with a single contractor. That would be easiest to manage in the short term. In addition to that, although we know there were other authorities who were embarking on shared contractor approaches, only one of them has actually had that in process. Two of them were still not yet started. So there was little expertise or evidence to look at to see whether that was appropriate to our own needs. Well, the report came out with 9 recommendations. So it's on my piece of paper. The first 3, 1 to 3 in the document, addressed quality requirements. This quality was considered to be the primary requirement, and we agreed a 60-40 percentage quality price split. The issue of customer satisfaction was obviously important in all this, and one of the options there one of the things we would like to do is undertake site visits. So any contractor that we wanted to look more closely at as a possible to award the contract to, we would like to look at previous work. I think, Hugh, you had a comment to make on this, didn't you?
Yes. As officers, we felt probably a bit, this recommendation was a bit set in stone, and in terms of we're not sure what circumstances we're going to change. So whether there could be some flexibility in that recommendation. So, for example, the recommendation would say that the procurement panel should consider undertaking site visits. What we're sort of concerned about is if about lack of resources, and especially if we have contractors from across the UK, in theory, from Europe, that we wouldn't have the resources to actually do those site visits, and we find alternative ways to actually make that assessment. So it's about not being so prescriptive in that recommendation. It gives the panel clearly understand where the task and finish group want to go in this, but they take into account the circumstances at the time of the procurement. So to summarise, that the recommendation is slightly changed to say that the procurement panel would consider undertaking site visits in order to, etc., etc.
Do you envisage, Hugh, that this is something that FFG could take on board on our behalf?
It's something they wouldn't be part of the evaluation panel, so they would do the advising. So it's us as officers would do the evaluation, and we, in terms of the quality, the tenants are also involved in that. So they aren't part of the evaluation panel. It is officers and tenants that do make that recommendation to the executive who the contractor should be.
Okay, thank you.
But they could, as I say, they could give general advice, general feedback on how those contractors are doing generally, and that's what they have done. That they would do, yes. But in terms of scoring, no, they couldn't do that part.
Okay, that. Recommendation 4 is the taking the average price approach. Now this is really a method of weeding out, if you like, the outliers. If bids are too high or too low, it avoids wasting too much time in looking at those. So it's a safety first type approach. Recommendation 5, that is to do with incentives and penalties. Again, we felt that that was a disruption in this sort of format, and we are recommending that no such areas like that are included in the contract details. Recommendations 6 to 8, they really relate to management working practice issues. And so as I mentioned a bit earlier, we decided that we should be going with a single contractor. Although we did feel that there was some perhaps benefits of looking at a multiple or shared service approach, as some of the other authorities are doing, but it's too early at the moment to embark down that route. We want to leave that option open, so that option 9 is simply to say that this needs to be considered in due course, and that may be something we can include in the current contract at some point in the future. I think thanks are in order also now to the officers for providing such a detailed discussion in terms of documentation, presentation, and also to Yasmin for producing, I think, a very pertinent report covering all of the areas. So well done, Yasmin, for doing that. I think, Richard, that's all I have to say at the moment. I'm happy to take questions.
Right, thank you very much. Thanks for that summary. Very helpful. Good. I have Councillor Cole who'd like to ask a question or make a comment. Please go ahead.
Yes, thanks, John. On the recommendations, number 4, the average price approach, evaluating prices. I presume you've taken legal advice on that you can discount bidders for bidding too low, which effectively you're doing, is that correct?
I think I'd look to the officers to give me advice on that, on the legal aspects.
So yes, so as long as we're clear in our contract documentation, that's what we're going to do. I mean, so we both had the procurement officer there and FFT who used this method of evaluating the price. But it is a legitimate way to go ahead. Yes, but of course we've got to clearly state that in the tender documents. That's the key thing.
And a bidder, if they follow the guidance, are they dependent upon what other bidders are going to bid, or is it entirely down to what they bid, whether they are dropped or not from under that clause?
That's where we need FFT's advice. They would set the boundaries of what around that average price would be, what we would expect. So therefore, that's what
okay. And the average price is defined in the bid, is it, in the bid document?
Yeah. So we would be transparent what we expect the average price.
Okay, fine. Right. Yeah. So they're working within constraints that they control, not
definitely.
They can't be dropped because they're too low. They're dropped because they aren't within the constraints of the bid.
That's the key thing. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's very interesting. Thank you.
As I think in particular, we don't want to go with bids which appear low and then end up with the same situation we had with Mears, who then pull out and claim that they don't have enough money and they have their right to leave the contract. Is it 12 months they have in the usual terms? They have a 12-month period in which they can decide to terminate.
Well, it's 3 months notice.
3 months.
Yes, I've heard of schemes of dropping the lowest bid, they bid too low, but I wonder whether there was a legal background for doing that. And that's been clarified. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. Recommendation number 7. Could I just be advised how we will deal with out-of-hours emergency calls? The reason I ask is that I have in the past been trying to pass on an emergency call to the appropriate people out of hours. And the very nice gentleman I was speaking to said to me, in the end, he couldn't identify the property. He lived in Essex and he'd never heard of Cranley. So hopefully that situation won't exist. So how do we deal with emergency out of hours calls?
If I can take that call, Councillor Ellis. We have an out of hours provider called Pinnacle that's council contracts that will take out of hours calls. They then link through to our contractor. They have access to all our housing lists, so they should be able to identify properties that are on our list. If they don't, something has gone on. There's also an out of hours housing officer who is on call as well, where if there is a problem, that call should come through to the officer who should know our housing lists at that point and access your system to manage it that way.
Thank you.
So, Chair, so Councillor Ellis, it seems your issue was with the corporate call centre, not the housing, not the maintenance contractor. And as Heather says, if they did have an issue, they can call one of us to actually clarify.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. Yasmin, you'd like to come in?
Thank you, Chairman. When we were discussing the average price recommendation 4, I thought whilst we were on there, I just thought it was worth pointing out that so all committee reports will have should have covering reports, and that's on the agenda as well. It's worth pointing out at the bottom of paragraph 5.1, implications of decision and resource, the last sentence that's about the volatility of the market and the procurement approach and price evaluation should be whatever is most appropriate. So I thought it was just worth pointing out that whilst the working group have suggested average price, of course we need to follow advice from our procurement officer, and most importantly any legal advice on how we do that eventually. So whilst the average price is perfectly within reason and suggested by the procurement officer and FFT. If that's not the process that's going to get us best value for money for the tenant, then obviously we'll need to do whatever that process is, if you see what I mean. So there's I'm sure, I'm not saying that we won't do that. I'm just saying that there's a bit of a caveat when it gets to that decision. I just thought it was worth pointing that out.
Thank you. Okay, next question I have is from Terry Daubney from the Tenants Panel. Would you like to go ahead, please?
Thank you, Chair. It's a reference to recommendation number 9. I may well have missed it in our considerations before, but what is the reason for putting that clause into the contract? Is it not something that if we were telling a provider that we were looking elsewhere that might upset them, or is it just normal practice?
The reason it's just for transparency, so that the contract term, Terry, it potentially could be 5 + 5, so up to 10 years. During that time, we may want to change the operating model, which again, we've spoken with FFT. That is something that's done in the market, and it's preparing the contractor to potentially get ready to change and to, not to rest on their laurels. Really, that the council has an appetite to collaborate, and it's something that we are exploring actively. So it's just to be transparent with them in that respect.
Yes, well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. Thanks, Heather. Good. Okay, I've got no more hands up, so we really go on to the recommendation, I think, which is that the Housing ONS Committee considers the report and the recommendations within it and agrees them for submission to the portfolio holder, who incidentally is with us tonight, so welcome, Anne-Marie. And then ultimately the executive. So with the exception of recommendation 3, to which Hugh has made a suggested alteration, which hopefully is being captured, can I take it that we are in agreement on the recommendations that are put forward? I guess put your hand up if you're not in agreement. Otherwise, I'll take it that everyone's happy. Right, I'm seeing no hands going up, so thank you very much for that. I'll just reiterate that I was I was proud of this committee for stepping up to the plate to deliver an urgently needed piece of task and finish work. I think it is the first piece of remote or virtual task and finish work that was done, and sure it could have been done better, but goodness me, it was a very good effort at short notice under difficult circumstances. So well chaired, Peter, and well done, officers, for giving us the information that was needed to make the deliberations in a very reasonable and efficient manner. Thank you. Right, the next item is going to be a review of the Housing Revenue Account Recovery Project, which is covered on pages 85 to 90. So can I call on Annalisa Howson to provide us with that update, please?
Sorry. Kimberly, could we share the PowerPoint presentation, please? So this report is to introduce to you the work that the housing team are doing post COVID-19. And I've just done a presentation to give you some more up-to-date figures and a bit of a national context. But I was just waiting for you to see the slides.
It's always the exciting bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry about this, Annalisa, my system's frozen.
Okay, well, I'll make a start and then hopefully the slides will catch up with us. Okay, So the HRA recovery project is part of the corporate recovery, change and transformation programme. So following COVID-19 and the coronavirus crisis, we recognised that a lot of our services stopped, and we needed to either make sure we recover them, whether we need to change them, or whether we need to transform services. So this is happening in 10 projects across the whole council. The housing recovery one is purely focused on HRA activities. So that's the landlord services. So we've developed 5 objectives. We've completed a SWOT analysis with the portfolio holder and the tenants panel. We've completed a project initiation document that's been agreed by the board, and we've completed all the project documentation, such as an equality impact assessment, a risk register, and all those bits and pieces. So since our last committee meeting, the world stopped, didn't it? On the 23rd of March. We were all told to stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives. So that meant for the landlord services that, as we've alluded to earlier, we could only do emergency repairs. We stopped all home visits, we stopped all letting of homes, and we focused on the council's new objective to support the immediate health and well-being and safety of local residents. So that meant setting up the community helpline, contacting our older tenants on the phone, being redeployed to other parts of the council to help with grant funding, and all those type of things. But as we moved into May, you're missing out on all my beautiful pictures. As we moved into May, we changed to stay alert, control the virus and save lives. So that was the easing of the lockdown. And when the government announced that the housing market needed to be reopened and people needed to start moving, all the guidance that was produced also was applicable to us as social housing providers.
I'm sorry about this, Annalisa. They're moving us over to the other SharePoint this evening. And I think what they've done is locked us completely out.
Okay.
I do apologise for that.
So sorry, you get to look at me rather than the slides. I can circulate them afterwards if that's helpful. So bear with me. So we reviewed the housing service and identified 5 project objectives, the key things that we needed to get back up and running and make sure we were going forward and delivering services. So the first thing, as you would imagine, is that we need to collect our rent. If we don't collect the rent, you know, we can't deliver any other services. Secondly, we wanted to get responsive repairs back and up and running to make sure people's homes were safe, and we were doing reactive work and making sure that nobody was living in uncomfortable conditions. Unsafe conditions we were dealt with, but uncomfortable conditions. We also needed to review our capital work programme, which was looking at the kitchen and bathroom programme, looking at roofing and things. And we also needed to make sure that we were letting homes. As I said, we completely stopped letting homes during the lockdown. We needed to make sure that we were advertising properties and helping people move. And fifthly, we needed to make sure that our new home development programme was still on track and that we were progressing with that. So the 5 key objectives were collecting the rent in, letting homes, reinstating responsive repairs, reviewing and reinstating capital works where possible, and making sure we were delivering on new homes. So looking at the picture nationally on income and rent collection, as you heard from Mike, that a lot of people are having difficulty paying their rent at the moment. And the Institute of Fiscal Studies have published information that show that the poorest fifth of all households have been hit the hardest financially by the COVID crisis. So they've lost 15%, around £160 a month. They've experienced a drop of income of 15%, or about £160 a month. Citizens Advice have also published some information that there's been 3 million universal credit claims since mid-March. That's a huge spike in claims. and some survey work that they did on people who had put claims in since March, they found that 53% of the people they spoke to had faced financial hardship while they waited those 5 weeks for that first universal credit payment. They didn't have a buffer, they didn't have the savings. 1 in 7 were unable to afford essentials, and 1 in 5 had to borrow money from friends and families to keep going. We've seen that with people contacting us for the community helpline and getting that emergency access, and the increase in the use of food banks that we've seen. Housemark, who we work with, have been collecting information since lockdown across a range of social housing landlords, and nationally there's been about a 10% increase in rent arrears. For us in Waverley, at the end of May, our rent arrears was up to 0.92%, which was compares to 0.7% last May. So although we're still within a good remit for the HRA business plan, we are seeing an increase, and we'll continue to monitor that, and as I said, support tenants through the change in their circumstances. Letting homes, we didn't let any homes during April or May, but I'm pleased that we've let 11 homes in June, and that's now picking up. We've got contractors working in properties, we've got homes being advertised, and we've got people bidding for them. You'll see in the report that we had 81 empty homes at the end of May. That's down to 71 at the end of June, so we are making a bit of headway into that backlog, and our contractors are working on 10 voids a week, so we're getting that turnover now. Where we had a bit of an issue was that we've had 30 deaths during lockdown, and people leaving their home, and unfortunately their next of kin couldn't get into the property during lockdown because everybody had to stay home. So although the tenancies were ended, the families hadn't been able to get in and clear the properties, and so we didn't get the keys back for quite a few properties. We've worked since the restrictions been eased, we've worked with those families, and the majority of those homes are now back with us, ready to be turned around and relet for other families. If we look at responsive repairs, nationally, there's around 800,000 responsive repairs have been built up during the 3 months of lockdown. For us, as Hugh said, I think we've had a downturn in the number of responsive repairs. Tenants were very helpful. They read the information we sent them in the notification letters, and were aware that we could only do emergency repairs, so they weren't phoning through responsive repairs. But in April we had, in March we had 500 requests for repairs, which is about average. In April it went down to 150, started creeping up in May to 170, and we've had 410 requests in June for responsive repairs. So you'll see that the work's starting to build up again. But as Heather shared earlier, all the backlog repairs have all got an appointment made, and we're starting to work through all those issues. And then I'm really sad you can't see this slide. I've got a lovely picture of one of our gas contractors in his full PPE kit. So you'll just have to imagine that: blue gloves, white overall, big mask. So you'll be used to seeing the reports that we are always very proud. We've got 100% in our performance for gas safety checks. Unfortunately, as you would expect, this has fallen over the last 3 months, particularly due to shielded tenants who don't want visitors in their home, understandably. So this has gradually fallen. At the end of April, we had 9 homes without a certificate. At the end of May, we had 16 homes without a certificate. But if you'll remember, our programme is normally at 10 months, we start trying to contact people to get in. So we knew after 2 months we were going to get a bit of a spike. And so as at the end of June, we've got 64 homes without a certificate, which is 95.8%. But the good news is we're doing well compared to nationally, which is 91.2% of homes have only got the gas safety. And I think Hugh was sharing with me today that the majority of those 84 homes, the contractor has got an appointment set up with the tenant to do the work, or those people who are very vulnerable and are streaming in a next shielding very, very cautiously. They're in conversation with the contractor so that as soon as they do feel able, we will get back into their home. And then moving on to capital works, as we mentioned before, we had to halt the kitchen and bathroom works. We have restarted roofing works because we're not going into people's homes, so that's much easier. And we have, as I mentioned before, started contacting tenants to see whether they are favourable to having any capital works done within their home. We've committed £220,000 for external decorations, and we've committed £325,000 for roofing works. So we're focusing on the external works and then working through our processes about how we could potentially deliver capital works in people's homes. And then finally, but not least, the new homes development. So again, I've got a lovely picture of the White Beam Way in Oxford Ridge, and we've got 10 new homes there, and the families have signed up and moved in, and they're really pleased to be in there. And it was delightful at our all-in housing meeting, which is the whole team get together, and the officer who was signing up the tenants to move into those homes was explaining how proud she was to work for Waverley, how delighted everybody was with the home, and how she really felt she was creating a legacy for future generations in Godalming. So that was really lovely to hear. And as Andrew said, during the lockdown, the actual development team have been able to essentially carry on as business as usual. There's been very minimal disruption for them, and they've managed to carry on putting in planning applications, doing surveys, and continuing to make sure we've got that flow of new homes coming through. Obviously, there's lots more detail in the report that I'm sure you've all read, and just wanted to give you a lovely slideshow to give you an update. So I do apologise that you haven't seen that, but we will circulate it. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Right, over to the floor. James, please, go ahead.
Thank you. Brilliant, Annalisa. Can you explain, apart from those sad people who lost their lives, obviously, and you couldn't get into their properties, why, when we weren't allowed to move, was there such a huge 81 empty homes? Where did those people go that has left them empty? It seems strange that anybody was allowed to move out of their properties. Thank you.
Well, if you'll recall, it's a bit like the responsive repairs. Because we had the changeover in contractors, we did have a bit of a backlog, which was why we hadn't been meeting our relet target earlier in the year. So we had a number of homes that we'd been working on and we were waiting for the contractor to work on. And then we did have a bit of a spike of vacancies during that time as well. And I guess the other thing to say is that the contractor stopped working other than doing emergency repairs.
Chair, if I could just add, I mean, the other reason people actually did leave the accommodation to get their own accommodation, perhaps with jobs and stuff, so there's a few number around that as well. So the people not only moved on due to death, but due to other reasons. So that's why the numbers were stacking up, and we weren't reletting them. So that's why the numbers did go up.
Okay, thank you.
Can you explain though, if people then moved, could we not have put some of our homeless into those homes temporarily if they were empty? I mean, if you buy a house, you don't get it all redone by a contractor. I mean, when I bought this house, they moved out at 12 and I moved in at 3.
Yeah, as a social landlord, we have a responsibility to make sure that the appropriate health and safety checks and any basic works are completed. So we can't do the back-to-back lettings. And the other thing is that, well, people probably weren't in a position to move during lockdown, but we also couldn't have our staff going out to meet people.
Hotels, could they those houses that were empty, even if they required modernising and dates.
So I think the point you were making was around using some of our accommodation for the homeless people that Mike was talking about, and we did do that. So we did minimum repairs to a number of properties that were actually held for the development programme, and we moved people in. So yes, the homeless were housed in our own stock as well as housing association stock. I can't remember the figure. I think it's about six homeless people we've actually temporarily put into our own properties as well. So we did use our stock for that.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing any other questions. No. It's a testimony to what a good explanation it was, and really looking forward to these slides, particularly the gas man with his mask on. That'd be good. I have a couple of brief questions. We've got start dates for execution of the plan, and we've got the scale of it. Where's the team at in terms of actually finalising these plans? Is everything more or less done, or is there still significant work to do just to make the plans ready to go?
It's been a little bit chicken and egg, to be honest. We've been reviewing processes and teams working in a new way, and it's just a case of dotting the I's and crossing the T's and making sure that we've got the documentation to support what people are doing already. So we should be, over the next 2 months, everything should be done that way, and then it's a case of hopefully working with the contractors and managing to pick up and make sure we get through the backlog of responsive repairs, the backlog of empty homes, and make sure we've got clear plans that we're able to deliver on the capital works.
Okay, thank you. And that leads on to the other question I had, which is, do our contractors actually have the capacity to help us catch up with the backlog over the next 12 months?
Heather, did you want to answer that? Because I'll just say yes.
I mean, I'll answer that. I mean, I think, okay. Yes, they've got the capacity, they said, to deliver this. I mean, the main problem is the capital programme inside people's homes, the kitchens and bathrooms, and that's one part. That's probably the main part of the plan that we haven't finalised. And I think just to manage expectations towards the end of the year, I don't think we're going to be able to deliver that programme in full when there will be an underspend on the capital. And as Chris say, we're just at the moment just contacting tenants to see how they feel about people working inside their homes. The contractor has got a method statement to work in people's homes, but it's about linking that up with the people that are willing for them to go in. So I think that's in terms of risk in meeting this plan, is about working in people's homes. I think that's my main concern. And again, we've still got to do some work on that bit.
Okay, thank you. So we have Councillor Rosamond on the call. Anne-Marie, could we invite you to chip in with any comments you might want to make at this point? Because this is
no, absolutely. Thank you very much. Very interesting meeting, and I particularly enjoyed reading the task group report. Few things I'd like to say. First of all, at every given opportunity I have, when speaking to any of the officers within the teams, I've been saying how brilliant they're doing. I've told the executive how brilliantly they have been doing, and any given opportunity I keep banging on about it. And I attended quite a few meetings with people through different strata in the organisation, and again have been very impressed by the commitment and their ability to think outside the box and take on new challenges, and have all performed brilliantly. So I just want to reassure you that it hasn't gone unnoticed with the executive. The only thing with regard to the procurement contract going forward, obviously we've got in strange times post-COVID or post-COVID 1, maybe there's going to be a COVID 2, I don't know. We don't know what suppliers are going to be out there as contractors. We don't know who's going to carry on being in the market to supply the sort of services we want. So I think we need to keep a very careful watching brief. There's a number of service providers have started to leave the market, and with companies diversifying, maybe it will be something they're not going to do. So I think we need to, as I say, keep a very careful eye on that. And in terms of the RCT programme, obviously I'm leaving it to the professionals because they know what they're doing far more than I do, but I'm very happy to support what they're suggesting, and attended a few meetings recently, and the input from all the team members, wherever they are in the organisation, they're still coming up with amazing ideas and really fresh sort of challenges. So I think we're incredibly lucky to have such an amazing team of workers within housing, which obviously is a very large area. So just wanted to keep everyone aware that I do bang the drum at every given opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for that. So recommendation on the particular item is that the committee review the report and agree any observations or comments they wish to pass to the executive. Well, the executive representative has sat and listened. I think we seem to be very comfortable with what's been put in front of us. It's it addresses all the high level points. The detail is very nearly there, and we've had assurance that with the exception of the capital repair works, we're in good shape to go ahead and deliver this. So I think by and large the comment to the executive is that the committee has reviewed the report and thanks the officers for it, and is very pleased to accept what we've seen this evening. Would anyone dispute that by putting their hands up? Okay, thank you. So that's it. Right, thank you very much, Annalisa. That was good, and we look forward to the slides. Right, our last item is to review and agree our work programme going forward. And in going through this, can I ask that members note that officers are still stretched very thinly in their need to support the COVID-19 response. And furthermore, Zoom meetings, at least while we get used to the technology and new protocols, are not suited to long agendas. So our next couple of meetings need to focus on key issues only, although that shouldn't prevent us from identifying things to talk about in the future and adding them to the longer term work programme. So with that in mind, can I hand the meeting over to Yasmin to lead us through a work programme discussion, please?
Thank you, Chairman. You stole exactly what I was going to say, part of it anyway. So yeah, I think it's good to remember that next couple of meetings, key issues only. At the moment, we are supposed to be just considering business critical under the temporary governance arrangements, which we've done this evening. So it's worth bearing in mind that until that changes, we'll continue to do that. That's one factor to be thinking about. And then, as you say, the other is officer resource. So I think it's worth saying a couple of things that we would have been looking at or would have looked at so far, as you alluded to at the beginning of the meeting, the mental health presentation on that. And we were due to be putting together a working group on the allocation scheme. So I just wanted to reassure committee members that those things haven't dropped off the radar. I've got a list in front of me of all the things the committee had agreed to look at, and then other things that are popping up as work goes on. So Andrew spoke this morning, earlier today, and in the meeting about the housing strategy and the homelessness strategy and how they will hopefully be coming up at the next meeting. So I propose that the chair and I and officers stay in touch about what could be coming up. We stay abreast of the goings on with the temporary governance arrangements. I take anything to coordinating board, and then we see in September what items are the most critical and are the key items, particularly keeping an eye on the last item we had, the housing and the HRA recovery change and transformation project. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm also, as always, happy to make a note of any suggested items for future meetings as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, I have Councillor Baker's hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. May I just remind us that we were going to look at mental health. Could that be prioritised very high, please, in the order of things, when we got an opportunity to perhaps look at other matters? I think particularly because the COVID-19 effect has really resulted in more mental health problems rather than less. So I think that gives it a degree of urgency. Thank you.
Chairman, I'll make a note of that. I'd be particularly interested to know. We were due to have a presentation from officers at our March meeting, but unfortunately we had to defer it. So we're hoping eventually to have that item, that presentation to the committee again. I think that will hopefully spark an important conversation, as you say, becoming an increase. Well, it seems it will be expecting to become an increasing issue that the committee should be aware of. So yes, I'll keep that high on the list. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good. Have Andrew Smith wishing to chip in as well? Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And I do hear what sort of Councillor Baker says. I think it's very important the committee kind of works out what it wants to achieve. Mental health is a huge issue. If the committee wants to hear again from the homelessness team on how we try to deal with clients with mental health, or the tenancy estates, the housing management team on how we support our tenants with mental health, that's one thing. But I think we do need to be clear on what we're focusing on. It is a massive subject, and what do we actually want to get out of it, other than hearing what we are doing and possibly suggesting ways that we could improve. But really, we do need to be sure of what we want to get out of it. That's all I would say. It's a massive subject, and it could go off in all sorts of directions.
May I come back on that? Sorry. Chair, may I come back on that for a moment?
Absolutely. No, please, let's close this down.
Can I just suggest that it's obviously not a matter for a general powwow, but maybe if the officers, if you and the officers got together to see what the most sensible focus would be before we consider it, that might be helpful. In view of the fact that the officers are very overpressed.
Yes, I think that's the concern. As Andrew says, it's a very, very broad topic. I think now we've discovered this wonderful new Zoom tool, it's probably not an unreasonable thing for us actually maybe to have an informal meeting of members of this committee, not even necessarily with officers present, just to throw that, toss this around and find out what we really want. We've probably all got different ideas. That's Andrew's concern. He doesn't want to have his valuable team time taken up with people trying to predict what we want to hear. I might suggest that sometime in the autumn we convene by Zoom at our own convenience, and just let's brainstorm this one, and let's find out what individual views are, and then we can go back to the officers with a clear request for something that can be focused and deliver what we want to hear. Okay, so I'll note that down, and Yasmin, I'll leave you to hold me to account on organising that at some stage.
I think that's a very good idea, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Andrew's hand is still up. Is that to come back again, or is that because it's gone? Right, Councillor Keane, you have a question, please.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I must apologise. My Wi-Fi dropped in and dropped out on several occasions, so I do apologise for that. But I did hear most of obviously most of the meeting. On the question of mental health, it is a huge subject. I'm very involved with young people in Hazelmere, and I do know that post-COVID, there is going to be a lot of anxiety amongst young people, young adults. So I'd very much welcome a kickabout for us to discuss this, so that we can all get our views across on how we could all maybe help in different ways in the community. Thank you.
Right, I'm hearing that loud and clear. Good. Okay.
Chairman, sorry to butt in. Obviously, this is the housing ONS committee, so whatever this committee looks at needs to be within that sort of housing side of things. But of course, we do have the community wellbeing committee as well. So perhaps if I contact Councillor Denis, who chairs the community wellbeing ONS committee, then we could discuss what the options would be. So because we don't want to sort of overstep the remit of the committee and ask something of the housing officers which they wouldn't be able to deliver. Yes,
I think that's entirely appropriate. I mean, I have a clear idea of what's worrying me. It's our housing provision, if you like, but that might not at all be what other members are thinking of. So I think that makes a really good point, and I have mentioned this to Councillor Denis, and he's absolutely up for it. So that would be good. Thank you. Right, so I think where we ended up there then is that Yasmin and Kimberly and I will keep looking at this and make sure that next agenda is suitably prioritised to match wherever we are in the journey through the COVID response. We have plenty of things to discuss, and well, perhaps Yasmin, if you've got your list, if you could circulate that to members so that they can see the list of things that we are considering, and then if other members wish to come back to either Yasmin or myself with stuff that's omitted or is deemed superfluous, then let's have this conversation online. It's going to be a challenge managing this efficiently for the next several meetings, but this committee is doing a pretty good job, I think, of using the new technology, and I'm sure we can cope with all of this. So I see no more hands up. I think it just it remains me to point out that the agenda item 11 involves exclusion of press and public, but we don't have any exempt items this evening, so that's good news. So I think pretty much on 8 o'clock, we can draw the meeting to a close. But before doing that, I'd just like to thank all the officers, particularly Democratic Services and Yasmin, for setting this up very professionally, apart from one or two bandwidth issues around Waverley and the absence of some excellent slides. I think it's been a very good meeting. So I thank all members for the discipline you've shown and the adherence to protocols. I thank officers for their presentations, and look forward to seeing you all in September. Thank you very much. Meeting closed.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.